My name is Dan Hollowell. I'm the Vice President of Safety and Operations for the International Coucil of Airshows. ICAS is a nonprofit organization for airshow performers and support service providers and event organizers. So just about everybody you've seen flying this week is a member of ICAS, and what we do is we on their behalf to improve the airshow industry through a myriad of interactions with the regulators, with industry professionals, et cetera. So I'm here to talk about how you become an airshow pilot and the process and how you go about from becoming a private pilot to launching directly into an airshow career. So we'll go ahead and talk about that now. And let's see here. So there are a lot of different routes that people can take into the airshow scene. There's obviously there's a million ways to become an airshow pilot besides winning the Powerball. But a lot of ways we see these days, people that start off either in the Red Boy races. You see people coming from the military. You see people coming from IAC. You see people coming from the Reno race, and also you see a lot of people coming from their own private school. So if you've ever heard of Greg Kuntz's aerobatic school, West aerobatic school, and there's dozens out there of aerobatic performing or schools that will teach you how to fly aerobatics, and there's dozens of ways that you can get your foot in the door with the airshow flying and how to be an airshow pilot. But the most common way that we see is actually IAC. So we'll talk about that in just a second. I do want to talk about one of the most common hang-ups and pitfalls that people get into. They venture into being an airshow, and they might be exactly what you expect. We've all seen a lot of videos and things on social media of pilots trying to expand their influence in ways that are rather harmful to their not just their airshow career, but their aviation career as a whole. So there's all sorts of avenues for people to promote themselves right now, but the saying of how do you get to Carnegie Hall is practice, and that has always been the most tried and true way of getting into the airshow environment. An example of the pitfalls. I'm not sure if anyone is familiar with this video, but there's a lot of influencers and people that are on social media, on YouTube and Instagram, that are very widely followed, and they like to put a lot of things on the internet. And that, I just want to caution people, before you see a person had 10 million views on a video, there are some pretty negative consequences that can come from it. So the first thing you want to do when you're thinking about becoming an airshow pilot is you need to know what you can and you can't do in the airshow environment. And here is a pretty prime example of what you cannot do.
Hey, Griff. So as you can see, I'm at a air show / car shows that last, I don't know, extravaganza here at Spanish Fork Airport. And they asked me to display my glider. I'm like, sure.
Stop it. Get some help.
So then they just really came up to me and said, hey, will you do a little aerobatics routine? Why not?
So that person, as you can gather, was invited to fly somebody that just walked up to him at an air show, and he never flown an air show, didn't know the rules of an air show, didn't have the requirements to fly an air show, but he was and still is a relatively large presence on social media, and unfortunately because he did not know those rules and what you can do and more importantly, what you cannot do, he lost his pilot license for, I think, 7 months. So that's just a glimpse into the pitfall that we see a lot of people get into with trying to promote themselves before they've established the groundwork that's required for a successful airshow career. So where do you start? That's the base question that most people have. I got a new Pitts, I got a new Decathlon, I've got a Piper Cub. I want to be an airshow pilot and make $1 million. And honestly, when people come to me and ask, the first question that comes out of my mouth is, "How are you with IC?" And now, they did not pay me to make. Don't work for IAC. I work for ICAS, but the proof is in the pudding. The parallels you see between what IAC teaches and what airshow pilots do is staggering. And to illustrate, what we do is look at the history of unlimited IAC national champions, and you can see pretty quickly that the list of national aerobatic unlimited champions parallels directly to current or former airshow legends. You got James Susie, won in 1970, Tom Poberesny, 97, 73, Art Scholl, Leo Laudenschlager, Patty Wagstaff, Michael Bullion, Kirby Chambliss, David Martin, Debbie Wren Harvey. Big Hollowell. So every one of those performers that has been or was or is currently a airshow performer that has either flown here or will fly here this week, and every single one of them was a national aerobatic champion in the unlimited category. Now, that's not to say that you have to be a unlimited champion to be an airshow performer. You could have a Cub or any airplane that you are proficient in, but the correlation between your success as an airshow pilot and your success as a competition pilot is absolutely undeniable. So I only pulled the unlimited. I didn't go down to intermediate sportsmen, etc. But I'm sure that the list would be even longer if I were to have done that. So before we launch into the technicalities of what you need to do and how you need to do it, there's a few things that we need to set the groundwork for terminology. So one of the things that I talk about often is an ACE, and that is an aerobatic competency evaluator, and that's the airshow peer that an airshow industry expert that will conduct an evaluation for a pilot to determine whether or not that pilot is proficient to fly at airshows. And we'll get into the details of that later. The ACE uses, when he or she evaluates the pilot, the ACE manual, and that's the Aerobatic Competency Evaluation Manual. That's a manual that ICAS has put out for the last 30 years, I'm sorry. And that dictates the practical evaluation standards, how the SAT cards are issued, the Statement of Aerobatic Competency cards are issued, etc. And it's something that ICAS took over from the FAA in 1993 after a long series of airshow accidents over the course of decades. So prior to 1993, the FAA was the governing body for airshow performers, and they issued all authorizations to fly at airshows. What they would have is, I hope there's no FAA in the earshot, but they would have untrained inspectors that aren't familiar with aerobatics, that aren't familiar with airshows, and they would say, they would come out to your airport and you'd say, hey, I want to be able to fly at an airshow, and they'd watch you fly, and they wouldn't know the particularities of a Pitts that you need to watch for if you're heavy on the top of a hammerhead or whatnot. And they would just sign people off, and there were dozens of accidents from the early 80s to 1993 when we took it over that were directly caused by inspectors not looking for or not knowing what to look for on their when they would watch those pilots fly. So as soon as ICAS, the industry, took it over and used the peer review where they had the Patty Wagstaff, Gene Soucy's evaluating the performers instead of the inspectors, the accident rate at air shows plummeted. It went from, I believe it was 12, it averaged 12 accidents a year for a decade, and it went down to 2 or 3 accidents a year over the next decade. And we're currently, we're still managing the decline in air show accidents, and that's in large part due to the peer review system that we've implemented over that time. That was a long time in the issue, but the next thing that I will talk about often is FAA Order 8900.1. If you are familiar with this order, I apologize because it is voluminous. It is very technical, and but there is a specific section of that policy that dictates how FAA inspectors and how air shows are to be operated. And all air shows across the U.S. are managed by the FAA through the use of FAA Order 8900.1. And there are tens of thousands of pages within that order, but there are 150 that have to do with air shows. And it's Volume 3, Chapter 6, Section 1. So there's like 20 volumes and 20 chapters in each volume, 10 sections in each chapter. So Volume 3, Chapter 6, Section 1, that's if you need it, you can go to ICAS's website, and we have a link to that there. But that's a very specific part of the FAA policy that dictates how air shows are covered. Next, I'd like to talk about what ICAS is. I already mentioned we are a industry organization. We're a nonprofit, and we work to enhance the air show industry through a myriad of ways. So in order to fly at an air show, you need something that's called a SAC card, and that's a Statement of Aerobatic Competency, SAC, and that is also called FAA 8710-, and that is the piece of paper that you get from the FAA that gives you the authorization to fly in waivered airspace aerobatically. Obviously, we all know the FAR is pretty stringently, especially at air shows, but the air shows given a waiver from those FARs, conducted in order to operate within that waivered airspace, you need to hold a statement of aerobatic competency. So we'll talk about how you go about getting that statement of aerobatic competency. Our website is www.airshows.aero, and on that website you will see the ICAS ACE manual. And as I said before, that is the policy. That is the rule book by which I operate, by which the ACE program operates, and it dictates just start to finish how you go about getting a statement of aerobatic competency card. There are some pretty basic requirements, and I'll drill into those here in a minute. But in order to get a statement of aerobatic competency card, you need to get a recommendation from an ACE. And that's so you need to get a recommendation from an evaluator. You need to have had 30 practices at the level at which you're requesting. So the entry level of the SAC card allows you to fly at 800 feet. And so you need to have had 30 aerobatic practice sessions at 800 feet AGL. And you need to complete an evaluation from an ACE. So we follow is it's just like the CFI and DPE model. So you need to have one person recommend you so that another person can evaluate you. Just like my CFI recommended me for my private pilot check ride, and I flew for the DPE. A recommending ACE will need to recommend you for your initial evaluation so that you can be evaluated by a second ACE that will follow the rules by which we'll talk about here. So to get that recommendation, obviously all of this presupposes that you have gotten your pilot's license. It's very uncommon to fly license. I'm sorry. With a private license, the compensation issue becomes a very tricky stream to navigate. Obviously, if you have a private pilot's license, do anything, you cannot receive compensation for anything. And the FAA lawyers are just a treat with that. I have heard people say that that an announcer saying someone's name is considered compensation, or that the more common things are rental cars or hotel rooms. Those are all considered a compensation. So there's nothing that says you cannot be an airshow pilot with just a private pilot's license, but common sense implores me to highly suggest that you do so with a commercial or an ATP. The next thing that would happen is that you'd go online and you complete the application. You say, hey, I'm Dan and I want to be an airshow pilot. And on the application, I list experience and what I've done and who taught me and how many hours I've flown. And then that application then goes out to all of the evaluators across the country. And there's about 65 of them. And most of them are flying here later today. A lot of them are flying here later today. You know, Kirby Chambliss, Michael Goulian, Sean Tucker, Bill Stein, Rob Holland. They're names that are pretty familiar throughout the airshow industry. And that application is then sent out to them, and they say, they get to take a look at to review it just to make sure that it's not that I'm not DB Cooper or somebody. And next is that all of that application is then forwarded to the ACE that's doing the recommending. So then the recommending ACE takes a look and says, okay, yes, this person has a lot of experience, and I'm familiar with them. It should be someone that is as familiar with flying as a CFI would be with a commercial applicant. So when I took my commercial check ride, my CFI had flown with me for 40-something hours, it felt like. And so the ACE that's doing the recommending should have not necessarily 40 hours of dual time, but the same degree of confidence that the applicant is proficient before recommending him to the ACE. So then comes the evaluation, which is the fun part. You get to go fly for an evaluator, and that's a good way to see what kind of stuff you have. And there's a very regimented, documented process for how this goes about. The ACE looks, or the evaluating ACE rather, looks at the recommendation that comes in. And so if Bill recommends me and says I'm good to fly for Scott, then Scott takes a look at Bill's recommendation and says, good application, he got a good recommendation from Bill, I'm ready to evaluate him, and that starts. So there are two components of the evaluation, just like any check ride. There's a ground component and the flight component, and the ground component is obviously a little bit more lengthy than the flight component, and it's just making sure that the applicant is aware of what the rules are in air shows, what you can do and what you can't do. You cannot fly aerobatics for the first time at an air show without a SAC card. If that's the one thing you take away from the day, that's a good thing. So just like the ground checklist for any other check ride, it's a review of the applicant's knowledge, so that the applicant and the evaluator are on the same page and can look for anything in particular on the flight evaluation. Then the applicant proceeds to the flight evaluation, which is the fun part. That's showing the evaluator what you have, what you can do, and there are very specific guidelines for what is reviewed, what's a requirement to be reviewed, just like the practical test standards for any check ride. There's a long list of maneuvers that need to be completed, all documented in the ACE manual. I didn't take the time to go through and list each one because half of us are already thinking about lunch. So if you have any questions about what you need to do, I'll talk further about what the generalities are. The list of maneuvers that are required are contained within the ACE manual. There are 4 categories of aircraft that we evaluate, and each category of aircraft has its own practical evaluation standards, and in one of them there's even further delineations, but I'll talk about that in just a second. The first is jet and piston-powered warbirds. Obviously, there are a plethora of them here, but the flight characteristics of jet warbirds and of piston warbirds are substantially different than that of an MX. And so you can't test the same maneuvers, an applicant's ability to fly maneuvers in an MX like you would with an L-39. As entertaining as it would be to see an L-39 do a Lumpshavak at high altitude. The other is sport aircraft, and that's anything that you can see outside the closet. It's anything that's non-warbird aircraft is sport aerobatic, and then because there's such a wide variety in those aircraft, we delineate those further, which I'll get into in just a second. Then there's rotorcraft, helicopters, gyroplanes, just about all those fun things, and gliders. So with the sport aerobatics, obviously there are different maneuvers that you can test it on depending on the type of aircraft that you have. The first is called Class A, and that is the highest performance, the MXs, the extras. Those are aircraft that are capable of inverted flight and advanced maneuvers and gyroscopics. Obviously, so extra. And this is just a guideline. So the evaluating ACE will work with you to determine what maneuvers your aircraft is capable of. It's not necessarily if you have a stock Stearman without an inverted fuel tank. If the Stearman is normally listed as a Class B, you work with your ACE to determine which class of aircraft you need to be evaluated in. So the maneuvers that are required for Class A aircraft, like I said, are much more high energy. Because the airplanes can do much more, you need to be evaluated on a much higher envelope. The next class below that is Class B, which is aircraft that are capable of inverted flight, but not necessarily capable of doing all those high energy maneuvers that Class A aircraft are doing. You're looking at Chipmunks, Decathlon, Great Lakes, modified Stearman. Those are anything with an inverted fuel tank is generally Class B, and obviously you're not looking at doing gyroscopic necessarily, but they do have a little bit more capability than aircraft in Class C, which are the stock Stearmans, the top rated Cubs, the very low. I don't want to offend any Cub pilots here or cadet pilots because they can do some pretty incredible things, but the envelope that they push to is not nearly as great as that in either of the other performance classes. So after you get that evaluation, it becomes a paperwork exercise from then. The recommendation, the evaluating ACE comes to ICAS, and we review it for accuracy, et cetera, and then we send it to the FAA. We recommend to the FAA that they issue the Statement of Aerobatic Competency Card based on the strength of the evaluation of the recommendation, et cetera. And the FAA will then take our word as an industry to issue that Statement of Aerobatic Competency to you as a pilot. So the FAA was very reluctant in giving up any of their control of the SAC program, and for insurance reasons, it makes a lot of sense to let them keep it because if anything happens, it's an FAA card, not necessarily ICAS card that Dan Hollowell has to go defend in court. So it's it's an FAA program that we help administer, and they have put a lot of trust in us as an industry to develop all these practices and policies, and they've been it's a very productive relationship, but it's been very contentious at times, obviously, as anything happens in the FAA. Obviously, that's a pretty fire hose course for how the process works from start to finish. But does anyone have any questions for how to become an airshow pilot? Questions about any of the things that I mentioned? Yes, sir.
Okay, it didn't touch anything on insurance liability and waivers for individual aircraft here.
Yes. So insurance and liability is that is something that you have to have, obviously, to fly at an air show. It's not something necessarily that we use as a judge when issuing the statement of aerobatic competency card, because it's the contracts for air show performers are between the organizers and the performers. So no event organizer, no insurance company that underwrites an air show would allow a uninsured aircraft or uninsured performer to fly or to exhibit at an air show that they're underwriting. So all performers are required to have liability insurance, both for the whole and for the act. So it varies. How much is the big question? Yes, sir. They do not. So the question, I'll come back real quick to that. The question was, do home builts that are just flying patterns, do warbirds that are flying the warbird chase, do they need a statement of aerobatic competency card to fly? The answer to that is no. So the only thing that you would need a statement of aerobatic competency to do is to fly aerobatics, and that's the definition is the FAA definition, and that's anything, generally speaking, anything above 60 degrees of pitch, and 45 degrees of pitch and 60 degrees of bank is considered aerobatic in the air show environment. But what you have with home builds and with the warbirds that are flying formation in the waivered airspace, they do not have statement of aerobatic competency card. The warbirds specifically are managed by the FAST program and the T6 chapters and the T28 chapters. They all have various FAST program permits them. The FAA acknowledges the FAST cards, and FFI is another certification that RV that can fly non-aerobatic at air shows and air shows. And to answer the question about the liability insurance, how much do you need to have? Generally, I would say the most common number we hear is $1 million in liability insurance. Patrick, is that about? It's about the so you need to find there's a half dozen companies that I'm familiar with that issue policies for air show performers, and they generally recommend $1 million policy. And again, that doesn't cost you $1 million. It's $1 million of coverage. So, yes, sir.
So going back to the flying around, the insurance required and medical types?
Because you're not the home builds. If you're in a gaggle of RVs, to use a better example, if you're flying a Mustang, to just do flying around the pattern here at Oshkosh, do you need a statement of aerobatic competency card? No, you do not. Because you are not breaking any FARs by operating that way. So if you're just doing pattern work or if you're just doing flybys, that you can do that under normal airspace without accessing the increased capabilities that are given by the FAA to operate within the Airshow waiver. It's the same. It's the same to fly any Part 91 or under whichever part. So whatever insurance you would normally carry for your airplane, and whatever medical you need to have is fine, so long as it's legal. Yes, sir.
Is the evaluation always done from the ground, or do they do it in flight in a two-place airplane?
The question was, is the evaluation always done from the ground to air, or can it be done in a two-seat airplane? It is actually, it's required to be done by ground looking up at the air. No. So as fun as that was to do, the question was, can we do GoPro evaluations? We had, due to the pandemic, no evaluators could go anywhere and all the travel restrictions. So we stood up a temporary program that the FAA gave us authorization to do, and that was to allow people to do evaluations or renewal evaluations by sending in GoPro footage of the practice that could be evaluated by the ACE. Obviously, thank heavens now that the worst of the pandemic is behind us, we are all out here together again, and that requirement or that permission has been withdrawn by the FAA. Yes, sir.
How often do they need to be evaluated?
Thank you. That's a great question. I apologize for not getting that. How often do you need to be evaluated? Annually. So there are an evaluation generally gets you until the end of the next calendar year. So if you're evaluated here today at Oshkosh, your statement of aerobatic competency card would expire on December 31st, 2023. And that's the intent of that is to allow you to get your renewal evaluation done over the at any time that you're flying at an air show in 2023. And so that renewal evaluation would then take you to the end of 2024, get the 24 season to get evaluated so that you always have a current card. Yes, sir.
What if you use an ACE 3 times?
3 consecutive renewals. Patrick asks, what happens if you use an ACE for more than 3 evaluations? So there's a long story to this, and there's a short story. The short story is the FAA had directed us to increase the frequency at which people are seen by other evaluators, so that you don't just go to one evaluator every time. I don't want to accuse anybody, but there are, as anyone that's ever taken a check ride knows, there's the evaluator that will give you the ticket, and there's the evaluator that will evaluate you. And the FAA, in its efforts to curb that, as a whole, directed us to require that after you are evaluated for 3 consecutive times by one ACE, you had to go to another ACE other than the guy that done you 3 times, and then you can go back to that same person. So it's just wanting to get more eyeballs on an applicant as they fly. Yes, sir.
For the 30 practice sessions, you say they have to be down to altitude of 800 feet. How do you do that legally without having a SAC card?
So the question is, how do you practice legally without a SAC card? And that is a great question. And again, IAC is not paying me, I promise you. But they have a great government outreach program for establishing practice aerobatic areas that you can set up long-term practice aerobatic areas or short-term practice aerobatic areas. The long-term, I believe, go up to 36 months, and the short-term go up to 30 days to 6 months. And that will allow you, you can get in theory, you can get a practice aerobatic waiver here at Oshkosh. In obviously late July is a rough time to do it, but mid-November it's possible to get a practice aerobatic waiver so that you can legally violate the minimum altitude requirements, so you can site at that you're more proficient.
practices, are they solo? Do they have to be solo?
Yes, yes, the practices do need to be solo, yes. And that's usually in part of practice aerobatic waiver. The FAA will require that in most cases, that it's solo. Unless you're in an aircraft that has a required crew of more than one.